bearing with us. We're having a little bit of a technical issue in our brand new offices. So thank you very much for your patience and thank you very much for joining us today. So what we want to do today is myself and my colleague, Greg Handel, who serves as Vice President of Education and Talent Initiatives here at the Detroit Regional Chamber, we will unveil the high-level data from our annual State of Education and Talent reports, which focuses on post-secondary educational outcomes in the Detroit region and across the state. I want to thank my colleague Greg, who is currently traveling down south in Alabama, I believe, today. So he's going to be doing this remotely as well as the rest of our panel. And speaking of our panel, we are very fortunate today to have three great friends of the Detroit Regional Chamber. Dr. Santa Ono, the president of the University of Michigan, Dr. Ora Peskovich, the president of Oakland University, and Russ Kavalhuna, the president of Henry Ford College. And they will join us after Greg and I do a data dump of sorts, and they will be joined by the great Zoe Clark from Michigan Radio. And again, thank you for being with us. And thanks also to our key partners in our ongoing endeavor to focus on post-secondary education and its success across the Detroit region and across the state of Michigan. First of all, the Kresge Foundation. The Kresge Foundation has been with us from day one, and we appreciate all of the support that they provide us that enables us to do the work that we do. And secondly, our key research partner, the University of Michigan Youth Policy Lab. The University of Michigan has been a steadfast supporter and friend, and we thank them for everything that they do to make our work possible. Excuse me. Several years ago, the Detroit Regional Chamber set out to create a statewide goal for post-secondary attainment across the state and in the overall Detroit region. We set that goal at 60% by the year 2030, and concurrent with that, to cut the racial equity gap of educational attainment by at least half by that same year of 2030. When the Chamber did this, our state did not have an official post-secondary attainment goal. At the time, it was only one of 7 states across the nation that did not have a formal goal for post-secondary education. And we are very glad that our governor, Gretchen Whitmer, established the 60% goal for the state of Michigan, and it is now not just the Chamber's goal, but our overall goal. What you're going to see today in this report is really a good news, bad news story. We're going to share a little bit of good news, excuse me, coupled with a little bit of bad news. So to start that off, good news is in our progress to reach 60% by 2030. We are currently at 53% of working adults across the region that have a post-secondary credential. Now that's an increase of almost 3% and reflects steady progress. Excuse me, bad time to have a cough. Bad news is that despite our 3% progress, we rank dead last among our peers in post-secondary educational attainment across the regions. Compared to other regions across the country, such as Austin, Minneapolis, that are well into the 60% range, we don't look so good. So for every promising statistic, we have a sobering one, and we're going to continue that. So why does this matter? In the knowledge economy, not surprisingly, we require more knowledge-educated workers. With rapid technological advancements such as AI, and of course, our signature automotive industry that is a technology industry, with AI driving transformation there, along with AVs and EVs, we are going to need more. In fact, the experts tell us that 70% of all jobs by 2027 which is basically the day after tomorrow, are going to require something beyond a high school degree. In other words, they're going to need a 2-year associate's degree, a 4-year degree or better, or at the very least, some skilled training. So if you compare the 53% to where we need to be at the 70%, the job looks a little challenging. Another reason why this matters is that those with post-secondary credentials, particularly bachelor's degrees or greater, are far, far less likely to be unemployed, regardless what the economic conditions are. If economic conditions are good, if they're poor, those with a bachelor's degree or higher have a 4 times greater, a better rate of not being unemployed. So it's a 4x difference with those with bachelor's degrees in terms of the risk of being unemployed. That's obviously not only good for that individual worker, it's good for their families, it's good for their communities, and it certainly helps with meeting the demands of today's high-tech businesses. So it also matters because if you look at per capita income, you will see where you stand in educational attainment. Full stop. If you look at this graph, it's essentially a linear graph rising from the low left to the upper right. The cities in the upper right quadrant of this graph show that with higher educational attainment comes higher per capita income. So best-in-class cities, places like Seattle and Minneapolis, far outstrip our region and our state's per capita income because, frankly, simply, they outstrip us in educational attainment. Now, if you've seen the Detroit Regional Chamber's work before, you will know that we talk about something called the leaky pipeline. And here's what I mean by that. Here's what this graph depicts. Let's go back in time to 2013. Let's take a group of 900 ninth graders in 2013. Of that 900 ninth graders, only 83 of that 100 graduated high school on time in 2016. Of that 100, only 60 enrolled in college. And of that initial 100, only 35 of them earned a degree or a credential within 6 years of graduation. Now, there is a little bit of good news here is that when we did this 3 years ago, that number was 30. We had 30 that earned a degree or a credential. Today, it's up to 35. The bad news is that at this rate, even with the slight improvement, we are shallowing to our goal of 60% by the year 2030. And with that, I'm happy to hand the rest of the data over to my traveling companion, Greg Handel, calling in from a Sheraton someplace else. Greg.
Thank you very much, Sandy, and good afternoon. Well, if today's data report has a headline for takeaway, it's this slide. Post-secondary enrollment continues to drop. The share of students not enrolling in post-secondary education directly after high school continues to increase. The bad news here is you see the red circles on the gray bars. Those gray bars are getting larger as the share of students not enrolling in post-secondary education continues to increase. 37% of students in the Detroit region and 59% in the city are not enrolling in post-secondary education after high school. If you look at the composition, the colored portion of the graph, you can see the composition of where they do enroll. And you can see with the yellow circles that the percentages of students enrolling in four-year institutions after high school has actually remained fairly consistent over the last 5 years. If you look at the bottom portion of those bars over time, that represents enrollment from high school directly into community college. And you can see that that is what's really driving the decrease in post-secondary enrollment. Next slide. And so these numbers should be setting off alarm bells. And so we want to just emphasize this. This is something we really need to focus on. It bears repeating. Despite some educational attainment gains, 37% of students in the Detroit region are not enrolling in post-secondary education after high school. That is a huge leak in our talent pipeline that is going to severely impact employers' ability to find highly skilled employees in the decades ahead. Clearly, we have to do more to get students to continue on to post-secondary education. So a little good news here. Graduation rates at four-year institutions for students in both the city and the region have increased incrementally over the last 5 years. Across the region, that graduation rate has increased from 68 to 71%. That 71% compares to a national graduation rate from four-year institutions of 70%. So we're actually ahead of the national curve a bit, but you can see the city increases from 37% to 42%. Two-year community colleges, both in the region and the cities, have seen only incremental increases or have held steady over the last 5 years. In the region, the graduation rate is 32% from community college. In the city, students, it's 12%. So the good news is that while the percentage of students obtaining post-secondary credentials are moving in the right direction, the bad news is nearly half of college students have not earned a degree within 6 years of enrolling. And you can see those percentages on the screen. That's 42% for the Detroit region and 70% of students from the city of Detroit. Those numbers reflect another major leak in our talent pipeline that we must continue to work to address. So good news for Detroit Promise students. You can go back one slide, please. Black and Latino Detroit Promise students are outperforming their national peers by impressive margins. Black Detroit Promise students are graduating at 62% at four-year institution, and that graduation rate is 13 percentage points higher than the US average. Latino students are outperforming the national rate by 7 percentage points. The Detroit Promise program, launched in 2013 and celebrated its 10-year anniversary last month, continues to reflect the type of program that can make a difference over the long term. We need more types of programs that can make college more affordable and accessible. They take time and they take long-term investment. And finally, in addition to those enrollment declines that we talked about earlier, the other major threats to achieving our 60 by 30 goal are outlined here. First, adult degree completion is declining. We have almost 500,000 working age adults who have completed some college but not a degree. That's another significant leak in our talent pipeline. And unfortunately, over the last 5 years, the number of adults over 25 earning an associate's degree or higher has dropped by 15%. Major racial equity gaps persist in degree attainment. There is a 19 percentage point gap in post-secondary education attainment between Black and white working age adults in the Detroit region. So despite some progress by programs like Detroit Promise, Black adults in the Detroit region have a lower education attainment rate than Black adults nationwide. That gap nationwide is 7 percentage points. Finally, we have an education perception crisis across the state. A recent survey that the Chamber conducted showed that voters don't believe four-year degrees are worth the money. In fact, only 26% of voters say a college education is very important to landing a successful job in Michigan. And 69% say a high school diploma or trade certification is the minimum level of education needed to be successful. We're aware that those perceptions do not align with economic and job market reality. Sandy, back to you. Thank you.
Great. All right, great. Thank you so much, and thanks for calling in on the road for this. So as I mentioned, we're having a little bit of a technical issue, so I'm hoping this is going to work. But it is my hope that we have Zoe Clark from Michigan Radio to moderate our panel with the three university leaders that I just mentioned. So Zoe, are you with us today?
I am, Sandy. Hello, not from a Sheraton, but I am with you.
Well, awesome. Well, Zoe, I'm going to hand the program off to you with my thanks.
Thank you so much, Sandy. Appreciate it. And thank you, Greg, for this deep dive into really, really important data. It is now my turn to introduce some really smart thought leaders and heads of institutions who are at the forefront of trying to make Michigan a better place vis-a-vis education and our talent pipeline. So now I am going to introduce first the president of Henry Ford College, that is the one and only Russ Kavalhuna. Russ, are you with us?
I am, Zoe. Good afternoon.
There he is. Hello, President. Good to see you. Next, we have President of the University of Michigan, President Santa Ono. Hello, President Ono.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
Hello. And I guess
Nice
I have
to
to say, as a U of M grad, congratulations on the Rose Bowl, right?
Thank you.
Good to see you. And
Nice to
finally, we are not quite sure, but we are hoping that President Ora Peskovitz from Oakland University is on the line. Are you there, President? Okay. I think we are still working on some technical difficulties with Aura, but we're going to give her a couple minutes. If she joins, hopefully she will say hello and we will hear her. But let's dig in. First, I mean, this is pages and pages of research. And as Sandy said at the top, I mean, it's a little of it was the best of times and it was the worst of times, right? There is a theme of good news. There is a theme of bad news. President Ono, let me start with you first, though. What are you optimistic about? Let's start there.
Well, as you saw in the data, over the past 5 years, there's been a significant increase in terms of four-year colleges. And we have found that to be the case at the University of Michigan. And it's not an accident, it really is because of investments that we have made in terms of accessibility, but also supports for student success that we've invested in at the institution. So we believe that that trend is going to continue. And we also believe that we can contribute to the state and the city by growing the size of the institution. Zoe, you probably know this was the first year in some time that the University of Michigan became the largest university in the state. And we believe through our analysis that we can grow even more. So we hope that we can harness the 5-year growth in educational attainment and degree completion that we've been seeing here at the University of Michigan and give that pathway to more students. And it's incredibly important, I think, also to interact with the entire sector. Like Henry Ford College. And so that I think it can be a win-win if we create a seamless pathway throughout the ecosystem.
And President Kavalhuna, I know that is something you and I have discussed and that you're passionate about. Let's talk about optimistic. What is the good news that you see when we talk this? And then we'll dig into the troublesome bits.
Well, by far, in my opinion, the best news here is there is a collective acceptance that this is a priority for the state.
Yeah.
You can look around the state, you can look around the nation, but there's a lot of people disagreeing about a lot of things. But here in Michigan, on both sides of the aisle, with industry, with philanthropy, with higher ed, everyone agrees with the data that was just explained, both for our region and for our entire state, that we have to increase the number of citizens who have a post-secondary credential to be competitive with any other state in the union. And then on top of that, you know, higher education doesn't have a history of working collaboratively across barriers. But with leaders like President Ono and President Peskovitz, you can see that they actually are leaning in, trying to develop a pipeline for the entire education system, and they're not unique. We've seen that from universities and community colleges over the last 5 years. Let me just give you 2 examples. Ora Peskovitz is the elected chair of Detroit Drives Degrees. I mean, the peers in that group, which are business, philanthropy, higher ed, and K-12, they've elected her the leader of that. And Santa Ono now is on the Growing Michigan Together Council, serving with leaders of those same sectors, coming together, trying to figure out how to change and modify our higher education system to do what we just described that the chamber has outlined, which is get more citizens with a post-secondary credential. First, we have to all be rowing in the same direction, and I can see that that's happened more and more every year.
So let's dig into some of the harder news to swallow, but then we are also going to talk about solutions. President Ono, what when you look at and whether it's your own internal data that you use, your KPIs, when you see this data, what is most concerning to you vis-a-vis, you know, the future of the state and the future of the university and the students?
Well, I want to start off by saying I'm optimistic, as Russ has indicated. I think that this past year, I've only been here for 14 months, has been really fantastic because I haven't seen in any other state this kind of passion, dedication, focus, alignment, if you will. beyond the Grow Michigan Together Council, which is going to be coming out with a set of wonderful recommendations, and Russ was key in those recommendations. I think we have the right pathways. And what's amazing is that from government to business leaders of Michigan to all parts of the higher education ecosystem, that you see a recognition that this has got to be a focus. And business leaders of Michigan has focused really on K through 12, but I think that moving forward, the plan of work is really going to focus into community colleges and into universities the first 2 years, a K to 14 kind of concept that Russ really put forward in the working groups that before coming to the council. And we endorsed that 150%. So the good news is that the troubling things that we see, it's within our reach. If we come together as a state with the support that we see from state government and also federal government strategically, I think we can really continue to move forward and achieve the goals that we have set forth for ourselves.
President Kavalhuna, KPIs, metrics that you're looking at that are concerning?
Yeah, we're not enrolling enough of Michiganders in our higher education system.
Mm-hmm.
And the perception that Greg just announced, the general citizenry has started to be skeptical of whether a higher education is worth the time and effort that the family or the student or the family and student have to invest. President Ono talked about this at the Detroit Economic Club recently, and he was right. We have to do more to show a value proposition for students getting in. We've also got to do a better job showing that the hurdles to getting into higher education are less. So that on those two fronts, I think we can make very quick progress. One, the state of Michigan and the federal government and institutions like U of M have done a ton to reduce and nearly eliminate the cost barrier. That is a little bit of a fable, that it's too expensive, particularly for low-income individuals to go to college. It's nearly free now for the low-income individuals, and those are who we need to enroll the most of. But to get them to take that jump, we need to show them the value proposition, and most of those students want a better life through a better job. And so the gold standard that Santa and I and others in our industry are trying to find is employers who will say, I will invest in these students during the higher education system to pull them through the talent pipeline into a meaningful career. We're really excited that we're going to announce one of those on Monday at HFC. We're the largest employer in Michigan. Corewell Health is going to promise jobs to our nursing students. And that is the kind of collaboration that we need to have for every single sector that needs better employees in Michigan. And we can replicate that. So to summarize, I would say we got to get more students enrolled and then show them the value proposition of a good job at the end of our pipeline, which requires better collaboration with groups like Detroit Regional Chamber.
So, when I think about this, it's sort of these two different sides. There's actually getting students to come, right? And then there's actually getting them through graduation. So let's dig into that latter half. President Ono, this is a concerning aspect that we look at, that even if you can get folks to, break those barriers, to apply, to believe it's affordable, getting folks to actually be able, getting students to be actually able to graduate is something that still needs some work.
Yeah, and once again, I think the data will show, and if we look now, not at Ann Arbor, but look at Dearborn and Flint,
Mm-hmm.
Those are areas where our numbers haven't been historically what we want. At Ann Arbor, the graduation, 6-year graduation rates have always been very high, but that's because of the selectivity of getting into Ann Arbor. So the real tough work is to have that kind of a positive trajectory for Dearborn and Flint. And you probably know from the data from just this year that we've seen a significant uptick in 6-year graduation and first-year retention at both of those institutions. It requires a very specific strategy. It requires investment. It requires not only that we pay attention to students while they're on our college campuses, but also before they even arrive. It requires student support. So, if you actually look at the reasons why people actually drop out, a part of it is financial. But as Russ has said, in many of these cases, for example, through Go Blue Guarantee, we're providing a free ride in terms of tuition. So there are other unmet costs that we have to address. That's one of the levers to have more of them graduate. But the other is to really wrap around them with support, both curricular and co-curricular, so that the student feels that they belong, but also get very specific personal attention and counseling while they're on campus. Some of that can actually be through artificial intelligence. We have some very new data, which is really remarkable, that shows that through AI, if you look at cohorts that are matched in terms of their input credentials when they arrive, that having a personal AI tutor and counselor that can answer all kinds of questions can have a huge impact on the student's success. And so some of it can be technology driven.
Oh my goodness, fascinating. President Kavalhuna.
Yeah, so we've got to do a better job of helping students see themselves as college material. And that requires higher education to get out of our campuses and into the places where these students need to hear the message that you are college material. And that is particularly true for those demographics that we just talked about from Sandy and Greg. Those folks who haven't seen college leaders say you are college material. And we're starting to do that now. In fact, one of our goals is to increase the percentage of students who are Latinx or African American students, because we know that those students deserve access to higher education. We know that our region and those students and their families will benefit from it. But Santa's actually absolutely right. We need to address the things that are not financial. And those are so broad that it's hard to even understand what they can be. But I'll just give you some idea.
Please.
We're talking about students who are just kind of barely contemplating themselves as college students in Dearborn and in Flint and in the parts of our community where we need to give them more access. And it's not enough to just help them learn math, reading, and writing, which are the gateway courses in the first 2 years of any institution. But it's even more to have them have someone who says you belong here. If you hit a bump in the road, whether it's because you're helping somebody at home with the family, or you're working a part-time job, or heaven forbid you have a flat tire, those types of immediate injections of support that, frankly, I don't know Santa's background, but I know my family provided that. But these students who don't have that, they're just one bump away from saying, you know what, college isn't for me. And that's really the next step of college and university student support systems, which is frankly what we're trying to do across the system.
So I'm curious, when we talk about education and perception problems, I really want to honor what Greg said, and I scribbled it down. Education perception problem. You know, nearly some now 75% of Michiganders do not believe that 4-year degrees are worth the money. I'm curious. I don't think that I need to ask you, President Kavalhuna, or you, President Santaono, whether you believe that, but what I'm curious is, for that 75%, what can all of us do, right, as Michiganders, to try to move that needle? Because when I see the data that says 70% of jobs by 2027 are going to need some kind of post-secondary work, there is a disconnect there, President Ono.
Well, I think that it's multifactorial, the reasons that there's a lack of confidence or belief in the ROI. I've talked about this in a podcast called Future You. You might know this person called Jeff Salingo. So you can actually see that if you want to hear a more elaborate answer to your question. But it certainly is an issue. And university presidents across the country are concerned with the perception of the ROI of a college degree. And it's particularly alarming because the data show, as you showed yourself, there's a 4x advantage to having a college degree. And so part of it has to do with the universities and the colleges. We don't do a good enough job reaching into the communities and telling that story. And part of it actually has to do with kind of the heterogeneity of the ROI. So if you actually look at it in a more segmented, granular way, you can see a huge ROI in certain majors, in certain fields, many STEM disciplines, computer science graduates. There's a lineup of people that want to hire them after 2 or 3 years, and their salaries are very, very high. But that's not true for everybody at Ann Arbor. There are other graduates of the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor and Flint and Dearborn that have problems getting jobs. And so we have to do a better job for them in connecting them and with future employment. There are plenty of needs for them, but we do a very poor job as a sector in articulating where the jobs are from day one and counseling them about the kinds of experiences and internships and co-ops that can really make them competitive once they apply. We have to do a lot more work on that. And when the public, when the moms and dads and grandparents see their kids getting jobs soon, and it's not just graduation rate, but they are employed, then they will have more faith in us as a sector. And it's really on us. It's not just telling the story, it's actually doing better for those we are educating.
President Kavalhuna, the perception problem. I think that's interesting that it's sort of on these institutions to tell the story better.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So here's what's happening. Michigan is in the middle of a perception change that we built for about 80, maybe 100 years, and that was when my parents, one of whom was an immigrant, came to this question of whether to go to college or not. You basically had two choices, both of which were pretty sure bets. You get out of high school and you walk across town and go into the local manufacturing facility, and you have a middle-class lifestyle for as long as you can physically hold up during that work. The other choice was to go to either the local university or the local community college, which my parents did. And they could get educated and go and get a middle-class lifestyle in any number of ways across the state. There was plentiful jobs and communities that benefited from those middle-class jobs. Well, the irony about the 75% of people in Michigan who are questioning the value here is that we also have 75% of the jobs of the future are going to require that education for which citizens are questioning the value of. And so that shows you that we need to change the perception that my parents and my parents' parents had, that you could just go without the college education, to a place where we say this has real value. And there's two missing links. One, Santa has hit on the head, and then it's leaders of higher education going out beyond our walls and saying and explaining this data that frankly DRC, the Detroit Regional Chamber, has given us the playbook that we can run with. The second part is to go to industry and say, help me make that argument. If you have, and we can do this by sector, higher ed, mobility, tech, if you need a certain number of employees with these skills, well, tell us what those skills are. We'll build the curriculum, but you have to promise us to invest in our students and with jobs. That will drive not only enrollment, but throughput. And if we can get lucky, and I think we can do this, it'll start to drive citizens from neighboring states into our area, which, because we've been so good at the previous life, where people could just walk across the street into the factory or the university, we've never really had to do that. And over the next 3 or 5 years, I think that's the gold standard. Universities, colleges, partnering with employers to show students there is a clear ROI.
President Ono, you wanted to jump in, please.
The good news is, as Russ and I have been saying, this past year has been almost magical. We're talking about these kinds of pathways, collaboration between colleges, universities, and business and government. The state gets it. They want to support us in developing these pathways. And so I'm really, really optimistic about the future of education in Michigan, in Detroit as well. And so I think that's one of the things I just really want to say, that we have to do that. But the other thing I'd like to say is that part of the lack of confidence has to do with the particular circumstances of many of the parents and individuals who have been out of college or university for quite some time. Part of it is their own personal circumstance. And so one of the things that we're focusing at the University of Michigan, as you know, we just are about to break ground in the University of Michigan Center for Innovation in Detroit, is to be part of the solution for them, to be more involved in upskilling and reskilling so that they directly see the ROI. And so that's part of it as well, I think so.
Well, let's talk about the aspect that you have, a minority city where the university is going to build this new big institution. And both of your hopes, when you look at the data and you just see Black students are not achieving the same as their peers, and that it's been a longstanding issue in the state. President Ono, let's start with you.
Well, first we had a problem post Prop 2 about actually addressing a decline in the numbers. That has taken a remarkable upswing in representation of this past year that we're very, very happy about. And we've also been looking at retention and graduation across different ethnic groups at the institution. And we have learned quite a bit about what we can do. Part of it really has to do with numbers and feeling part of the institution and embraced by the institution. We have to do more as a university in terms of multicultural spaces, investment in the Trotter Multicultural Center, of those things, and really having the kinds of programs that make students feel welcome is a big part of the solution. So we have more work to do, but the trend is in the right direction, and we have plans to invest even more.
President Kavalhuna.
Yeah, Henry Ford College, if you have 100 students here, only 35 of them self-identify as white. So a majority of my students identify as something other than white. And the highest percentage of them are economically distressed for our region. So we work really hard at trying to be the institution that serves the students that meet that need. And candidly, that is a broad swath of students, all of whom we describe as marginalized because they did not see themselves as college material or worthy of that investment. And I'll just be candid, we need to give disproportionate investment to those students because one, it's the morally right thing to do as an access institution, and it changes people's lives. I'll give you an example about that in a minute. But the second reason is it makes sense for economic development. We are having fewer and fewer high school graduates as a state, and that's going to be the case for the next at least 10 years. So we have to take those students that historically have been marginalized outside of this life-changing opportunity that is higher education, and we have to put more and disproportionate resources in lifting them up. Now, the United States Supreme Court has made that more difficult, and Prop 2 in our state long ago made that more difficult. But the truth is, if you just focus on economic distress, students in need, you'll capture the students that we most desperately need to give a chance and then give them an opportunity. And the best thing to do is take institutions like mine, get them comfortable in the idea of college, and then move on to a world-class university like University of Michigan. And that kind of transfer network is something that we're hoping that the Growing Michigan Together Council will help us put some oomph behind. And I know Santa's been gracious in helping me think through that.
And we'll hear recommendations from the council, and I have it on authority from the governor herself that it is likely we will hear about it in this State of the State address and in budget proposals like that. We have just a minute left, and I want to end on a positive note. And so I want to look to both of you. Let's start with you, President Ono. When you think about the state of education and talent in Michigan today, and given you have been here now a year, so you've got some teeth into this. Tell us, what are you most excited about and looking forward to?
Well, we had a presentation from Richard Florida, who actually studies different metropolitan areas. And we looked at some of this data at the Grow Michigan Together Council, and he's bullish on Michigan. He thinks,
and Ann Arbor in particular, I should add.
Yeah, he thinks that if we really focus on making these desirable places to live, because we have so many graduates coming out of higher education here, that we have the raw material. The problem is that they're leaving for the states, for the coasts. So he and I actually agree that the recommendations in the Grow Michigan Together Council report really hit the nail on the head. We know what to do, and we can relatively quickly, and he believes this, become like Austin was. Maybe in 5 years, we can be the kind of place that's growing rapidly because we have so many people coming into the state for education. If we follow those specific recommendations in the report, we should get more of them in the state. We can turn this around pretty quickly. It's a beautiful state. Just travel around the state. We have to tell the story better. We got to get people excited about the state while they're here, and they will stay. And they'll create jobs. They will really fuel the economic resurgence of the state. We can do this together.
And President Kavalhuna.
Yeah, so let me encapsulate what Santa just said in the image of a young man. This is a real story. Emmanuel came to Southeast Michigan from Mexico and went to River Rouge High School and got this idea from River Rouge High School that the future of the American dream was getting into college and getting a bachelor's degree. But he didn't get into a university. So he went to Henry Ford College and got a couple credits and a couple semesters under his belt. Had to teach himself English while he was here. Then he transferred to a big university in Ann Arbor, and he did so well there, one of his professors said, you know what, you should apply to be a Rhodes Scholar. Now, 30 people on Earth get to be a Rhodes Scholar, and Emmanuel was selected as a Rhodes Scholar. He's graduated from the University of Michigan. He's on his way to Oxford, and he came by way of Mexico, River Rouge, Henry Ford College. And if you do that, 94% of the students that come to our community colleges will stay after they've graduated from a university. And so what we want to do is replicate Emmanuel and more of him. Now, I hope, Santa, you have, that was the 31st Rhodes Scholar at U of M. And I hope HFC and other community colleges bring you more, but this is really what we can do. And I couldn't echo Santa more. This is the time, and we've got a rare collection of people who are interested and willing to lean in.
President Russ Kavalhuna, president of Henry Ford College, and President Santa Ono of the University of Michigan. Thank you both for the time and for your optimism about the future of the state of education and talent right now in the state of Michigan. And a huge thank you, of course, to the Detroit Regional Chamber, to Sandy, and everyone who joined the call today on this really, really important work.
Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you very much, Zoe.
Thanks all.